The kitchen smelled of rising dough and wood smoke. Miguel Ortega, called Cookie by every man who'd eaten his food these past 40 years, worked his hands through sourdough starter with the patience of a priest saying prayers. The Wyoming winter pressed against the windows of the Beckett ranch house. Outside, snow gathered in the corners of the fences. Young Jack Morrison sat at the rough-hewn table, coffee steaming in his chapped hands. He'd only been working the Beckett spread for 3 months, still learning the rhythms of the place, still learning when to speak and when to keep silent. Through the frosted window, Jack watched an older woman walking past the barn. She wore a dark wool coat and carried a stack of books. Her hair, silver blonde in the weak sunlight, was pinned back neat and proper. "Cookie," Jack said. "Who's that old lady heading toward town?" Cookie's hands stopped moving in the dough. He looked up slow, eyes following Jack's gaze to the window. A smile tugged at the corner of his weathered face, the kind of smile that holds a whole story behind it. "Old lady?" Cookie said softly. "Son, you got no idea what that woman survived to walk that road?" Jack shrugged. "Folks say she teaches school now. Wasn't from around here originally." Cookie wiped his hands on his apron and poured himself coffee. He pulled up a chair across from Jack and settled into it with the groan of a man whose bones remembered every hard year. "That's Mrs. Julia Beckett," Cookie said. "And before you ask, yes, she married the boss. 5 years ago this spring." Jack's eyebrows went up. "Boss married a woman that age?" "He married a woman who knows her worth," Cookie said. His voice carried an edge now, not anger, something firmer. "And if you're going to work this ranch, you'll learn to see what he saw." Jack had the good sense to look embarrassed. Cookie took a long drink of coffee. Outside, Julia disappeared around the bend in the road. The morning light caught the ribbon tied around her wrist, faded velvet, worn soft with time. "Pull up closer," Cookie said. "I'm going to tell you how she got here, how she survived what would have broken most folks, and why, when you see that woman, you tip your hat like she's the finest lady in 3 counties. Jack leaned forward. "This story starts 5 years back," Cookie said. "Autumn of 1885, with a train, and a woman who thought her whole life was already over." The train hissed and groaned as it pulled into Roland Station. Julia May Crowley stood in the narrow aisle of the passenger car. Her carpetbag sat at her feet. Heavy with everything she owned now, her hands smoothed the front of her blue traveling dress. The fabric had been good once, quality wool with delicate lace at the cuffs. But time and laundering had faded the color to something between sky and slate. She'd worn it for her first wedding 23 years ago. She was wearing it now for what she hoped would be her last. Through the soot-streaked window, Wyoming rolled past. Endless grassland, low hills that looked like sleeping giants, sky so big it made her feel small. The land out here didn't apologize for being harsh. It just was. Julia pressed her hand against the pocket of her skirt. Inside, folded and refolded until the creases had worn soft, was the letter. The one that had changed everything. She'd read it so many times she could recite it. "Dear Miss Crowley, I received your response to my advertisement with great interest. A rancher's life is a hard one, and I have managed alone since my wife's passing. But a man gets tired of silence, tired of cooking his own meals and mending his own shirts and talking only to horses. You write that you are a widow with nursing experience and a steady hand. That is more than I dared hope for. I am not a man of pretty words, but I am honest. I have land, cattle, and a house that needs a woman's touch. I would be honored if you would consider becoming my wife. Yours in hope, Harland Pike." The train lurched to a stop. Julia took a breath, picked up her bag, stepped down onto the platform. The air hit her first, dry and cold, and smelling of dust and sage and something she couldn't name, something wild. The wind cut through her coat like it was made of paper. Roland, Wyoming wasn't much to look at. 2 saloons, a general store with a crooked sign, a church with a steeple that leaned slightly to the left. Everything built from raw timber that hadn't been painted, hadn't been gentled. The whole town looked like it had been dropped here and told to survive. Julia stood on the platform as the other passengers scattered. A businessman in a dusty suit. A family with 3 children who ran shrieking toward a waiting wagon. A cowboy who tipped his hat to no one in particular and ambled toward the nearest saloon. No one came to meet Julia. She waited. The platform emptied. The train hissed and prepared to leave again. Still, no one came. From the porch of the saloon across the street, 3 young men lounged against the railing. Ranch hands by the look of them, worn boots and sweat-stained hats. They watched Julia with the lazy interest of men with nothing better to do. One of them said something. The others laughed. Julia felt heat rise in her cheeks. She turned away, checked the depot office. A clerk sat inside, half asleep behind a counter stacked with mail. "Excuse me," Julia said through the window. "Is there a Harlan Pike expected to meet someone here?" The clerk blinked at her. "Pike? The rancher?" "Yes. He don't come to town much." "Got a spread about 10 miles northwest." Julia's stomach dropped. "He didn't send word he was coming?" The clerk shrugged. "Ain't my business to track every rancher's errands, ma'am." The train whistle blew, long and mournful. Julia stepped back as the locomotive began to move. Steam curled around her skirts. The sound of it leaving felt like something final, like a door closing. She was alone on the platform now, just her and her carpetbag in a town that didn't know her name. One of the young men called out from the saloon, "You lost, ma'am?" Julia didn't answer. She picked up her bag and walked toward the center of town, head high, spine straight, the way her mother had taught her. The wind pulled at her hat, tugged loose a strand of silver blonde hair. She tucked it back with trembling fingers. She'd sold everything to come here. Her mother's china, the little house in Philadelphia that her first husband had left her, the sewing machine she'd used to earn money after he died. Everything except what fit in one bag and the $20 sewn into the lining of her coat. There was nothing to go back to, so she would go forward. The general store sat in the middle of the main street. Julia pushed through the door. A bell jangled overhead. Inside it smelled of flour and tobacco and old leather. Shelves lined the walls, canned goods, fabric, tools. A pot-bellied stove in the corner radiated heat. Behind the counter, a woman in her 40s looked up from a ledger. She had sharp eyes and hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. "Help you?" the woman said. Not friendly, not unfriendly, just waiting. "I need directions," Julia said, "to the Pike Ranch." The woman's expression shifted. Something flickered there. Curiosity, maybe pity. "You family?" "I'm expected," Julia said. It wasn't quite a lie. The woman studied her, took in the faded dress, the worn bag. The lines around Julia's eyes that spoke of years lived hard. "It's 10 miles northwest," the woman said slowly. "Past the fork in Silver Creek. You'll need a wagon or a good horse." "Is there someone I could hire?" "Old Ned runs a wagon service, usually hauls freight. Might take a passenger if you pay." Julia's fingers found the coins in her pocket. She had enough. Barely. "Where would I find him?" "Livery stable, end of the street." Julia thanked her and turned to leave. "Ma'am," the woman called. Julia stopped. "You sure you want to go out there today? Sun's already past noon. Be near dark by the time you arrive." "I'm expected," Julia said again, firmer this time. The woman nodded, didn't argue, just went back to her ledger. Old Ned turned out to be a man of about 65 with a limp and tobacco-stained teeth. He looked at Julia's carpetbag and named a price. She paid it without haggling, climbed up onto the wagon seat beside him. The wagon creaked as they rolled out of town. Julia looked back once. Roland grew smaller behind them, the church steeple, the saloon, the raw wooden buildings that looked like they might blow away in a strong wind. Then she faced forward. The land opened up before her, rolling grassland that went on forever. The sky stretched overhead, impossibly wide. Clouds moved across it like ships on a slow ocean. Ned didn't talk much, just clucked to the horses and spat tobacco juice over the side of the wagon. After an hour, he spoke. "You kin to Pike?" "Not yet," Julia said. Ned grunted, spat again. "He's a hard man, does well enough with cattle, keeps to himself mostly." Julia nodded. Her hands gripped the edge of the seat. They forded Silver Creek. The water ran low, rocks showing through like bones. The land on the other side looked drier, harder, less forgiving. Another hour passed. The sun slid lower. Then, in the distance, Julia saw buildings, a house, a barn, corrals with cattle moving slow inside them, smoke rising from a chimney, the Pike Ranch. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Ned pulled the wagon up to the house. It was a simple structure, wood and stone. A porch that needed mending, windows that looked dark even in the afternoon light. "Want me to wait?" Ned asked. Julia hesitated, then shook her head. "No, thank you." She climbed down, took her bag, paid Ned the rest of what she owed him. He tipped his hat and turned the wagon around. The sound of the wheels faded as he headed back toward town. Julia stood alone in the yard. From the barn she heard men's voices, the lowing of cattle, the strike of a hammer on metal. Someone was working. She smoothed her skirt, checked her hat, walked toward the barn. 3 men stood inside the dim space. One held a branding iron over a small fire. Another wrestled with a calf. The third watched with his arms crossed. The third man was Harland Pike. Julia knew him immediately. He matched the description he'd given in his second letter. Tall, sandy-haired, a thick mustache, sun-browned skin, and eyes that looked pale blue in the shadows. He wore work clothes, shirt stained with sweat, leather chaps dusty from the corrals. He hadn't seen her yet. Julia cleared her throat. "Mr. Pike?" All 3 men turned. Harlan's eyes found her, traveled over her face. Her graying hair, the lines around her mouth, the slight stoop in her shoulders that she'd tried so hard to correct on the train. His expression changed, started neutral, then something hardened in it. "Can I help you?" he said, voice flat. Julia stepped closer. "I'm Julia Crowley. I wrote to you. You asked me to come." Silence fell in the barn. The 2 ranch hands exchanged glances. One of them grinned, not kindly. Harlan stared at her. "Julia Crowley." "Yes." He set down the tool he'd been holding, walked toward her slowly, stopped a few feet away. "You sent me a photograph," he said. Julia's breath caught. "Yes, in my first letter. That photograph." Harlan's voice was very quiet now. "It didn't look like you." "It was me," Julia said. "From 10 years ago. You thought you'd send me a picture from when you were younger, and I wouldn't notice." Julia's face burned. "I didn't mean to deceive you. I just wanted you to see—" "See what?" Harlan's voice rose now. "See a woman who doesn't exist anymore?" The ranch hands were watching openly now, enjoying the show. Julia straightened her spine. "I wrote my age in my second letter, 52. I assumed you received it." "I never got a second letter," Harlan said. "Just the photograph and the first letter, the one where you failed to mention how old you are." Julia's hands tightened on her bag. "You never stated an age requirement in your advertisement." "I shouldn't have to," Harlan snapped. "Any woman with sense would know what a rancher needs. Someone young enough to bear children. Someone who can work hard for decades, not just a few years before she's too old to—" He stopped himself. But the words hung there anyway. Julia felt something crack inside her chest. Not break, just crack, like ice under pressure. "I can work," she said quietly. "I'm strong. I've been a nurse, a seamstress. I've managed a household. I've survived things that would have—" "I'm sure you have," Harlan cut her off. "But I need a wife who can give me sons, not a companion for my old age." One of the ranch hands snorted, tried to cover it with a cough. Julia looked at Harlan, really looked at him, saw the calculation in his eyes, the way he'd already dismissed her, like she was a horse that didn't meet his standards. "You wrote me kind words," she said. Her voice shook now, not with tears, with anger. "You said you valued honesty, steadiness, that you were tired of being alone." "I was," Harlan said, "but I expected someone appropriate." "Appropriate?" Julia repeated. The word tasted like ash. Harlan shifted his weight. For the first time, he looked uncomfortable. "Look, I'm sorry you came all this way. I'll pay for your return ticket. Give you enough for a hotel in town until the next train." "I sold everything I had," Julia said, each word precise, clear. "My home, my belongings, everything, to come here." Harlan's jaw tightened. "That wasn't my doing. You misrepresented yourself. I sent you my photograph and told you who I was. You chose to imagine something different." The two men faced each other across the dusty barn floor. Harlan looked away first. "I can't marry you, I'm sorry, but that's the truth of it." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a few bills, held them toward her. Julia stared at the money, at this man who'd written her letters about loneliness and hope, who'd made her believe that maybe at 52 she could start again. She didn't take the money. "Keep it," she said. "I don't want your charity." She turned and walked out of the barn. Behind her, she heard one of the ranch hands laugh, heard Harlan say something low and sharp, heard the laughter stop. But she didn't look back. The yard was empty, silent except for the wind. Julia stood there with her carpet bag in her hand and the whole wide sky pressing down on her. She had $20 in her coat lining, no home to return to, no family waiting. Her sister had died last winter. Her brother had stopped writing 3 years ago after she couldn't loan him money. She was alone in a place that didn't want her. The sun was sinking toward the horizon now. Another hour and it would be dark. The temperature was already dropping. She could feel it in the wind. Julia started walking. She didn't have a plan, didn't know where she was going, just knew she couldn't stand in Harlan Pike's yard another minute. The road back toward town stretched out before her. 10 miles in the gathering dusk, with no wagon and no horse and no one who cared whether she made it or not. She walked anyway. Her boots raised small clouds of dust with each step. The wind pulled at her skirt. Somewhere in the distance a coyote called out, long and wavering, like something lost. Julia May Crowley had been many things in her 52 years. A daughter, a wife, a mother briefly, to a little boy who'd died before he could grow, a nurse who'd tended the sick and dying in Philadelphia's poorest neighborhoods, a seamstress who'd worked her fingers raw to pay rent after her husband died. She'd been strong because she had to be, quiet because women were supposed to be, grateful for scraps because she'd been told that's all she deserved at her age. But walking down that dusty Wyoming road with the sun bleeding red across the horizon, something changed inside her. Not broke, changed. She'd come here hoping for kindness, for partnership, for a man who'd meant the words he wrote about valuing steadiness and honesty. She'd found a man who saw her as livestock, too old for breeding, not worth keeping. Julia stopped walking. She set down her carpet bag, looked back toward the Pike Ranch. It was already small in the distance, just dark shapes against the darkening sky. Then she looked ahead, toward Rollin, toward a town that didn't know her, that had already laughed at her. The wind pushed against her back, like it was urging her forward. Julia picked up her bag. She started walking again, one foot in front of the other, the way she'd always done. She didn't cry, didn't let herself, not yet. There would be time for that later, when she found somewhere safe, somewhere private, somewhere she could let herself break down and then put herself back together. Right now, she just walked. The sky deepened from blue to purple to indigo. Stars began to appear, cold and bright and impossibly distant. Julia pulled her coat tighter. She had maybe 2 hours of walking left before she reached town, before she had to figure out what came next. 2 hours to think, to plan, to decide if she was going to let Harlan Pike's rejection define her or if she was going to define herself. The coyote called again, closer this time. Julia didn't stop walking. She'd survived her first husband's death, her son's death, her second husband's fists, Philadelphia's judgment when she'd fled that marriage with nothing but bruises and shame. She would survive this too. She didn't know how yet, but she would. The wind carried the smell of sage and dust and the cold promise of the coming night. And Julia May Crowley walked on into the gathering dark, alone but not defeated, carrying everything she owned and nothing left to lose. Cookie paused in his story to refill Jack's coffee. The young man sat motionless at the table. His own cup had gone cold an hour ago. Outside, the winter sun climbed higher, but neither man noticed. "So she just walked?" Jack said. "In the dark? 10 miles?" Cookie nodded. "She walked, because what else could she do? Go back and beg Pike to reconsider? Sleep in his barn like a stray dog?" He settled back into his chair. His eyes went distant, remembering. "Now," Cookie said, "I wasn't there for what happened next. Not right away. But Thomas told me later, told me exactly how it went. And I believe him, because Thomas Becket ain't never been a man who lies." He took a sip of coffee. "Let me tell you about the night Julia Crowley met the man who would see her for what she really was." The dark came down fast in Wyoming. One minute the sky held the last purple remnants of sunset. The next, it was black velvet pierced with stars that looked close enough to touch. Julia had been walking for nearly an hour. Her feet hurt. The carpetbag seemed to gain weight with every step. The cold seeped through her coat and dress and settled into her bones. She should have accepted Harlan's money, should have swallowed her pride and taken enough to pay for a hotel room and a ticket east. But the thought of his face, the calculation in his eyes when he'd looked at her, the way he'd reached for his wallet like she was a problem to be solved with cash. No, she'd rather freeze. The road stretched ahead, pale in the starlight, rutted and dusty. She could barely see it, had to watch her feet to keep from stumbling. Behind her, something moved in the darkness. Julia stopped, listened. The sound came again, hoofbeats, slow and steady, getting closer. Her heart kicked against her ribs. Stories flooded her mind, things she'd heard about the frontier, about women alone, about men who saw opportunity in isolation. She gripped her carpetbag tighter, looked around for somewhere to hide. But the grassland stretched flat in every direction. No trees, no rocks, nowhere to go. The hoofbeats came closer. Then a voice called out from the darkness. "Ma'am, you all right?" Julia turned. A man on horseback emerged from the gloom. He rode slow, non-threatening, one hand visible on the reins, the other resting easy on his thigh. A lantern hung from his saddle. It swayed with the horse's movement, cast shifting light across the man's face. He looked to be in his mid-50s, lean, weathered, with eyes that caught the lamplight sharp and intelligent. He wore a dark coat and a hat pulled low. A rifle was slung across his saddle, but he made no move toward it. "I'm fine," Julia said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. The man reined in his horse a respectful distance away. "You walking to town?" "Yes." "It's another 9 miles. You won't make it before midnight." Julia lifted her chin. "I'll manage." The man studied her for a long moment. Not the way Harlan had looked at her, not assessing her value or measuring her against some standard, just looking, taking her measure as a person. "Name's Thomas Becket," he said finally. "I got a ranch about 3 miles south of here. Was heading home when I saw you." Julia didn't respond, didn't move. Thomas shifted in his saddle. "I'm going to speak plain, ma'am, because you look like someone who appreciates plain speaking. It's cold, it's dark. You got a long walk ahead, and no guarantee you'll make it safe. I got no business leaving a woman out here alone." "I don't know you," Julia said. "No, ma'am. You don't. But I know decent folks when I see them, and I know trouble when I see it. You got the look of someone who's had a hard day." Despite herself, Julia almost laughed. A hard day. That was one way to put it. "I can offer you a ride to town," Thomas said. "Or, if you'd rather not arrive there after midnight with nowhere to go, you're welcome to shelter at my place tonight. I got a ranch cook who lives in. Name's Cookie. Between the two of us, you'll be safe enough." Julia's hands tightened on her bag. Every instinct screamed not to trust strange men in the dark. Not after Philadelphia, not after the second husband, who'd seemed so kind until the wedding night. But she was so tired, so cold. And something in Thomas Becket's voice sounded honest, blunt, not trying to charm or persuade, just stating facts. "Why would you help me?" she asked. Thomas considered the question. "Because someone helped my wife once. Long time ago. She got caught in a storm between here and town. A family took her in, gave her shelter, didn't ask for payment or expect anything in return." He paused. "She died 5 years back, but I remember what she told me about that night, about being alone and scared and grateful for kindness from strangers." Julia heard the grief in his voice, raw even after 5 years. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "About your wife?" Thomas nodded. "Me too, but that ain't why I'm telling you. I'm telling you because I understand being alone in the dark, and I wouldn't leave a dog out here on a night this cold, let alone a woman." He gestured to his horse. "I can offer you a ride, or I can ride alongside you while you walk. Your choice. But I ain't going to leave you." Julia looked at him, at the patient set of his shoulders, the quiet way he sat his horse, the respect in keeping his distance. She thought about walking 9 more miles, about arriving in Rollin after midnight with nowhere to sleep and $20 that wouldn't last long. She thought about pride and survival and the difference between them. "Your ranch," she said. "Is it far?" 3 miles south. Got a warm fire and food. A bed you can sleep in. I'll take the floor. And this Cookie? He'll vouch for me, and he'll make sure I keep my word." Julia took a breath, made her choice. "All right," she said. "Thank you." Thomas dismounted, offered her his hand to mount up behind him. Julia hesitated, then placed her hand in his. His grip was warm, calloused. He helped her up with the ease of a man used to hard work. She settled onto the horse behind the saddle, her carpet bag held awkward in front of her. "Hold on," Thomas said. "He's gentle, but the road's rough." Julia gripped the back of the saddle with one hand, tried not to touch Thomas any more than necessary. They rode into the darkness. The cabin appeared like a small miracle. Light glowed warm through oiled windows. Smoke rose from the chimney. The barn stood dark and solid against the stars. Thomas helped Julia down, took her carpetbag, led her to the door. Inside, warmth hit her like a wall. A fire crackled in a stone hearth. The smell of cooking filled the air. Rabbit stew, if Julia's nose was right. And fresh bread. The room was simple but clean. A table, chairs, a bed in the corner, a trunk. Tools hung neat on the walls, and standing at the stove, wooden spoon in hand, was a man who looked to be near 70. Brown skin weathered by sun and wind. Dark eyes that missed nothing. He wore an apron over his work clothes. He looked at Julia, then at Thomas, then back at Julia. "Cookie," Thomas said. "This is—" He paused, realized he didn't know her name. "Julia Crowley," she said. "Mrs. Crowley," Thomas continued. "This is Miguel Ortega. Everyone calls him Cookie." Cookie wiped his hands on his apron, nodded to Julia. "Ma'am?" "She needs shelter for the night," Thomas said. "I found her walking to town in the dark." Cookie's eyebrows rose, but he didn't ask questions, just gestured to the table. "Sit. You look half frozen." Julia sat. Her legs shook with relief. She hadn't realized how exhausted she was until she stopped moving. Cookie ladled stew into a bowl, set it in front of her with a chunk of bread, poured coffee dark as midnight. "Eat," he said. Not a request. Julia ate. The stew was rich and savory, the bread still warm from baking, the coffee bitter and strong. She hadn't eaten since morning, hadn't realized she was hungry until the first bite. Thomas hung his coat by the door, stood by the fire, gave her space. Cookie moved around the kitchen with the easy rhythm of a man in his own domain. He watched Julia with sidelong glances, assessing, not hostile, just careful. Julia finished the stew, set down the spoon. Her hands had stopped shaking. "Thank you," she said. Cookie nodded, refilled her coffee. Thomas pulled a chair away from the table, sat down, but kept distance between them. "You don't have to tell us anything you don't want to tell, but if you need help getting to town in the morning, I can take you." Julia wrapped her hands around the coffee mug, let the heat seep into her palms. "I came here to marry a man I'd never met," she said. Might as well be honest. They'd find out anyway if they took her to town. He'd advertised for a wife. We exchanged letters. He asked me to come. Thomas said nothing, just listened. When I arrived, Julia continued, he decided I wasn't suitable. Why? Cookie asked. His voice was gentle. Julia met his eyes. I'm 52 years old. He wanted someone younger, someone who could give him children. Silence fell in the cabin, not the uncomfortable kind, just quiet, like the men were digesting this information. Finally, Thomas spoke. He turned you away? Offered me money for a return ticket. Julia's voice was steady now. I didn't take it. So you walked? Cookie said. So I walked. Thomas leaned back in his chair, studied her face. That took grit. Julia almost laughed. That took stupidity. I should have taken his money. No, Cookie said firmly. You should have done exactly what you did. Julia looked at him, surprised. A man treats you like that, Cookie said. You don't take his money, you take your dignity and you walk. Money you can earn. Dignity, once you sell it, you can't never buy it back. Something warm moved in Julia's chest. Not hope, not yet, just recognition of being understood by a stranger. I don't have anywhere to go, she admitted. I sold everything I had to come here. My home, my belongings. I have $20 and no family to return to. Thomas and Cookie exchanged a look. Some wordless communication passed between them. You need work? Thomas asked. Julia straightened. I'm a hard worker. I've been a nurse, a seamstress. I can cook and clean and manage a household. Cookie needs help, Thomas said. I got 6 ranch hands who come through for meals. It's getting to be too much for one man to handle alone. Cookie grunted. I manage fine. You manage, Thomas said, but your hands hurt in the cold, and your back ain't what it was. Cookie glared at him, but didn't argue. Thomas turned back to Julia. I can offer you work, room and board plus wages. Help Cookie with cooking and the household, maybe some mending. The hands are rough on their clothes. Julia stared at him. You don't know me. You don't know if I can do the work. You walked 10 miles in the dark rather than beg, Thomas said. That tells me what I need to know about your character. The rest we'll figure out. I don't want charity, Julia said. It ain't charity, it's work. You earn your keep or you don't stay, but I'm willing to give you a chance if you're willing to take it. Julia looked between the two men, Thomas with his quiet, steady gaze, Cookie with his weathered face and assessing eyes. She thought about Rollin, about arriving there with nowhere to go and money that would run out fast, about the stares and whispers that would follow her, the rejected mail-order bride. Too old, not wanted. She thought about Philadelphia, about running from her second husband's fists, about the shame that had followed her, the way people looked at a woman who left her marriage, even when he beat her, even when staying would have killed her. She was tired of running, tired of shame, tired of being invisible. I'll work, she said, hard as I can, and I'll prove I'm worth keeping. Thomas nodded. Fair enough. Cookie handed her more coffee. You can sleep in the bed tonight. Thomas will take the floor. I got a cot in the barn I use sometimes. I can't take the bed, Julia protested. You can, and you will, Cookie said. His voice held no room for argument. Tomorrow we'll figure out better arrangements. Tonight you rest. Julia wanted to argue, but her body was so tired, her mind exhausted from the day's humiliations and fears. Thank you, she said quietly. Later, after Cookie had gone to the barn and Julia was settled in the bed behind a blanket hung for privacy, Thomas sat by the fire. Julia couldn't sleep. The bed was comfortable. Warm quilts covered her. But her mind wouldn't quiet. She heard Thomas moving around, the soft sounds of a man preparing to sleep on the floor, the rustle of blankets, the creak of floorboards. Then silence. Julia stared at the ceiling, thought about the day, about Harlan's face when he'd looked at her, the dismissal in his eyes, like she was livestock that didn't meet his standards. She thought about her son, Samuel, dead 25 years now, but still alive in her heart, still 2 years old forever. She'd been a good mother for those 2 years, had loved him fierce and desperate and complete. The fever had taken him in 3 days. She'd been a nurse, had saved strangers, neighbors, people she barely knew. But she couldn't save her own child. Her first husband had died 6 months later. Heart attack. Quick and merciful. Unlike Samuel's death, which had been slow and terrible. She'd thought she was done with loss then, had armored herself against it. Then came the second marriage, the mistake. The man who'd seemed so kind, so respectable, who'd turned cruel the moment they were wed, who'd taught her that there were worse things than being alone. She'd left him after 3 years, fled in the night with bruises and terror and nothing else, had rebuilt herself in Philadelphia, alone, working, surviving. When she'd seen Harlan's advertisement, she'd thought maybe one more chance. Maybe a frontier man would be honest, direct. Maybe she could find partnership instead of cruelty. She'd been wrong. Julia closed her eyes, refused to cry. Tomorrow she would work, would prove herself, would earn her place. Tomorrow. Tonight, she just needed to survive the memories. Cookie returned to the cabin before dawn. Julia woke to the sound of him stoking the fire, building it up against the cold. She lay still behind the blanket curtain, listened to the morning sounds of the household waking. Thomas's voice, low and rough with sleep. "She still sleeping?" "Think so," Cookie replied. "Let her rest. Yesterday was hard." "You think she'll stay?" Cookie was quiet a moment. "I think she's got nowhere else to go, but that don't mean she'll stay. Depends on if we make her feel like she belongs." "I ain't good at making people feel welcome," Thomas said. "You did fine last night, treating her like a person instead of a problem. That's more than Pike did." Thomas grunted. "Pike's a fool. Pike's a man who thinks women are livestock, good for breeding or not worth keeping. And we're different?" "We better be," Cookie said firmly. "Hannah would come back and haunt us both if we treat that woman like she's less than she is." The mention of Hannah hung in the air. Julia heard Thomas move, heard the door open and close as he went outside. She waited a few minutes, then rose, folded the blankets neat, smoothed her dress as best she could. It was wrinkled from sleeping in it. Her hair had come loose from its pins. She found her carpet bag, pulled out her brush. Pins, worked her hair back into some semblance of order. Then she took a breath, pulled aside the blanket curtain. Cookie stood at the stove. He glanced at her, nodded. "Morning." "Good morning," Julia said. "Can I help?" Cookie raised an eyebrow. "You don't even know where things are. Then tell me and I'll learn." Cookie studied her face, then nodded toward the cupboard. "Plates are there, forks in the drawer. Set the table for 3. Thomas will be back in a minute. He's checking the horses." Julia moved to obey, found the plates, plain but sturdy, set them out, careful, found the utensils, set the table like she was setting her own. Because maybe she was. The door opened. Thomas came in with the cold. He hung his hat, washed his hands in the basin, saw Julia at the table, and paused. "Morning," he said. "Good morning, Mr. Beckett." "Just Thomas." He sat down. "We don't stand on ceremony much out here." Cookie brought food to the table. Bacon, eggs, biscuits that smelled like heaven, coffee strong enough to wake the dead. They ate in silence, not uncomfortable, just the easy quiet of people focused on food. Julia watched both men from the corner of her eye, the way Thomas ate efficient. No wasted movement, the way Cookie moved around the kitchen like he owned it, which, in a way, he did. Finally, Thomas pushed back his plate, looked at Julia. "You meant what you said last night? About working?" "I did." "Then here's how it'll go. You help Cookie with cooking and cleaning, mending when needed. The hands come through for breakfast and supper. Lunch they pack with them. You'll earn room and board plus $15 a month." $15? More than Julia had made as a seamstress, more than she'd hoped for. "That's generous," she said carefully. "It's fair," Thomas said. "You work hard, you earn it. You don't. We part ways. Simple as that." Julia nodded. "I understand." "Cookie'll show you how things run. I got work to do." Thomas stood, pulled on his coat, headed for the door. He paused with his hand on the latch, looked back at Julia. "One more thing," he said. "What Pike did, turning you away like that. That was cruel and unnecessary. You didn't deserve it." Julia's throat tightened. "Thank you." Thomas nodded, left. Julia sat at the table, stared at her empty plate. Cookie began clearing dishes. "You gonna cry?" "No," Julia said. "All right to cry if you need to." "I know, but I don't. Not yet. Maybe later." Cookie nodded like that made perfect sense. "Come on, then. I'll show you where everything is. And you can tell me if you really know how to cook or if that was just talk." Julia stood, rolled up her sleeves. "I can cook. My biscuits aren't as good as yours, but I can learn." Cookie smiled, small but genuine. "Then we'll get along just fine." The days settled into a rhythm. Julia woke before dawn, helped Cookie with breakfast, learned where everything was kept, how Thomas liked his coffee, what the ranch hands ate, how much to make, when to have it ready. She learned that Cookie had been with Thomas for 12 years, had been here when Hannah was alive, had stayed after she died because Thomas needed someone, and because Cookie had nowhere else to go. She learned that Thomas worked from dawn to dusk, barely spoke during meals, ate whatever was put in front of him, never complained, never praised, just ate and worked and returned exhausted each night. She learned the names of the ranch hands: Jack Morrison, youngish and cocky; Pete Garza, quiet and steady; Old Sam, who'd been working cattle for 40 years, the others who came and went. They looked at her with curiosity at first, this older woman who'd appeared out of nowhere. But Julia kept her head down, did her work, spoke politely, but didn't invite familiarity. After a week, they stopped staring. After 2 weeks, they started saying thank you for the meals. That felt like victory. Julia also learned that Thomas had been truthful. The work was hard. Cooking for 7 men meant starting before dawn and working until the dishes were clean after supper. Her hands grew red and chapped. Her back ached from bending over the stove. But it was honest work. She earned every dollar. And at night, when she lay in the small room Thomas had built for her off the main cabin, she felt the satisfaction of exhaustion earned. She belonged to no one, owed nothing except her labor. That felt like freedom. One evening, 3 weeks after her arrival, Julia was mending shirts by lamplight. Thomas sat by the fire. Cookie had gone to bed. The cabin was quiet except for the crackle of flames and the whisper of Julia's needle through fabric. "You settling in all right?" Thomas asked. Julia looked up, surprised. He rarely spoke to her beyond necessities. "Yes," she said. "Thank you." Thomas nodded, stared into the fire. "Cookie says you're a hard worker." "I try to be." "More than try. He says the hands are eating better than they have in years, and their clothes actually fit now." Julia felt warmth in her chest, pride. She'd earned that. "I'm glad I can be useful," she said. Thomas glanced at her. "You ever think about going back east?" Julia's hands stilled on the shirt she was mending. "No, there's nothing there for me." "No family?" "A brother I haven't heard from in 3 years. He made it clear I was on my own." Thomas was quiet a moment. "I got a sister in Missouri. Haven't seen her in 15 years. She wrote me when Hannah died. Said I should sell the ranch and come live with her." "Why didn't you?" "This is my home. I built it with Hannah. Buried her on that hill behind the barn. Can't leave her." Julia understood that. The way grief tied you to places. Made leaving feel like betrayal. "You must have loved her very much," she said softly. "I did." Thomas's voice was rough. "More than I knew how to say while she was alive. After she died, I promised myself I'd never care about anyone that much again. Hurts too much when they leave." Julia set down her mending. "My son died when he was 2. Fever. I was a nurse. I'd saved dozens of people, but I couldn't save him." Thomas looked at her. Really looked. Not at her age or her graying hair. At the grief in her eyes. "I'm sorry," he said. "Me too." They sat in silence. 2 people who understood loss, who'd survived it and built walls around their hearts to keep from feeling it again. "I don't know why I'm telling you this," Thomas said finally. "Because sometimes it helps to say it out loud to someone who understands," Julia said. "Because you've been alone for 5 years, And that's a long time to carry everything by yourself. Thomas nodded slowly. Yeah, I suppose it is. He stood, stretched. I should get some sleep. Early morning tomorrow. Good night, Thomas. Good night, Julia. He paused at the door to his room. I'm glad you stayed. I know this wasn't what you came west for, but I'm glad you're here. Then he was gone. Door closed, leaving Julia alone with her mending and the fire. She sat very still. Let his words settle over her. I'm glad you're here. 4 words. Simple. Honest. They meant more than she wanted to admit. Cookie sat at the table the next morning, watching Julia work. She'd been with them a month now. October was fading into November. The air had turned sharp. Snow would come soon. Julia moved around the kitchen with confidence now, knew where everything was, how much to make, when to have it ready. She looked different too, healthier. The hollow look in her eyes had faded. Her hands were rougher, but stronger. She'd gained a little weight. The dress that had hung loose on her fit better now. You thinking of staying? Cookie asked. Julia looked up from the biscuits she was shaping. I haven't thought beyond the next day. Maybe you should. Why? Cookie chose his words carefully. Because you're good for this place. Good for the work. Good for Thomas. Julia's hands stilled. Thomas barely speaks to me. That's because he's thinking too much about Hannah, about what he promised her, about what it means that he's starting to enjoy having you around. Julia's heart beat faster. What did he promise her? Cookie sighed, stood, poured himself more coffee. Hannah was sick for 2 months before she died. Fever that wouldn't break, her lungs filling up. At the end she could barely breathe. He paused, remembering. Thomas sat with her every night, held her hand. She knew she was dying. And one night, right near the end, she made him promise something. What? Julia whispered. She said, promise me you won't be alone forever. And Thomas, he was half crazy with grief. He said, I promise I'll never love anyone else. Julia's breath caught. Hannah tried to correct him, Cookie continued. Tried to say that's not what she meant, but she was too weak, couldn't get the words out. She died that night. And Thomas has believed for 5 years that he promised not to love again. But that's not what she asked, Julia said. No, she asked him not to be alone, but grief makes liars of us all. We hear what we want to hear. Cookie looked at Julia, his dark eyes serious. He's starting to care about you. I can see it. The way he asks if you're warm enough, if the work's too hard, the way he listens when you talk. He talks to me less than anyone, Julia protested. That's because he talks to you in his head all the time. I've known Thomas Beckett for 12 years. I know when he's thinking about someone. Julia turned back to her biscuits, hands trembling slightly. I'm not here to replace his wife. No one's asking you to, but you're here, and you're alive, and you're kind and strong, and exactly the kind of woman Hannah would have wanted for him. You didn't know me a month ago. I know you now. I know you walked away from a man who tried to buy you. I know you work harder than most men half your age. I know you treat people with respect even when they don't deserve it. That's all I need to know. Julia was quiet for a long moment. What do you want me to do, Cookie? Just keep being yourself. The rest will happen or it won't. But don't run because you think you're not wanted. You are. More than you know. Before Julia could respond, the door burst open. Thomas stood there, his face tight, angry. We got company, he said. Harlan Pike just rode up. Says he needs to talk to you, Julia. Julia's stomach dropped. Cookie stood. What's he want? Didn't say, but he's got 2 of his men with him, and he don't look like he came for a friendly chat. Julia set down the biscuit dough, wiped her hands on her apron. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. I'll talk to him, she said. Thomas's eyes flashed. You don't have to. I can send him away. No, Julia said firmly. I'll face him. Whatever he wants, I'll face it. She walked to the door. Thomas and Cookie flanked her like guards. Outside, Harlan sat on his horse, 2 ranch hands beside him, the same ones who'd laughed at her that day in the barn. Harlan looked at her. His face was hard, angry. "Mrs. Crowley," he said. Not friendly, not kind. "I hear you've been working for Beckett." "I have," Julia said. Her voice didn't shake. "That's interesting." "Because I've also heard some talk in town. Talk about you and him. About what it looks like when a woman shows up alone and moves into a man's house." Julia felt ice in her veins. "I work here, that's all." "That's not what it looks like," Harlinda said. "And in a town like Roland, appearance matters." Thomas stepped forward. "Watch your mouth, Pike." Harlan smiled, cold and mean. "I'm just stating facts. A woman of her age living with a widower. People are going to talk. They already are." "Let them talk," Julia said. "I know the truth. So does Thomas. So does Cookie. That's all that matters." Harland leaned forward in his saddle. "Here's the thing, Mrs. Crowley. I made you an offer. You refused it. Now you're working for Beckett, living in his house, making him look good while I look like the villain for turning you away." "You are the villain," Julia said quietly. "You judged me worthless because of my age. You offered me money like I was livestock you'd failed to purchase. You humiliated me." Harlan's face darkened. "I did what any reasonable man would do." "No," Julia said. "You did what a cruel man does, and now you're angry because I survived without you, because I found somewhere I'm wanted and useful." "You think Beckett wants you?" Harlan laughed, harsh and bitter. "He's using you for labor. Once he gets tired of you, he'll send you away, just like I did." Thomas moved fast, grabbed Harlan's bridle, pulled the horse close. "Get off my land," Thomas said. His voice was deadly quiet. "And don't come back. If I see you near Julia again, we'll have a different kind of conversation." Harlan jerked his horse back. "This isn't over, Beckett. That woman is causing trouble, and trouble has a way of coming back around." He wheeled his horse, rode off with his men following. Julia stood frozen, watching them go, then her legs gave out. Thomas caught her before she fell. "Easy, I got you." Julia leaned against him, just for a moment, just until her legs remembered how to hold her. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to bring trouble to your door." "You didn't bring anything," Thomas said firmly. "Pike brought that himself. He's just angry that you didn't need him." Julia looked up at Thomas, at the anger in his eyes, the protectiveness, and she realized Cookie was right. Thomas was starting to care. The question was, what was she going to do about it? Cookie refilled his coffee and Jack's. The young cowboy hadn't moved in an hour. The kitchen had grown warm with the morning sun, but neither man noticed. "So Pike threatened her," Jack said. "Just for working here?" Cookie nodded. Pike was a man who couldn't stand being wrong, and Julia surviving without him, thriving even, that made him wrong, made him look cruel, which he was. What happened next? Cookie's face grew serious. What happened next was that Pike decided being wrong wasn't enough. He needed to make Julia wrong too, make her the problem instead of him. He leaned back in his chair. And that's when the stranger showed up. The stranger arrived on a cold November morning. Julia was in town for the first time since she'd started working for Thomas. She needed fabric for mending and thread that Cookie's store of supplies didn't have. Thomas had offered to come with her, but Julia had refused. She couldn't hide forever. And she needed the people of Roland to see her as something other than the rejected bride. Sarah Morrison's general store sat in the center of town, the same woman who'd given Julia directions that first day. Julia pushed through the door. The bell jangled. Sarah looked up from her ledger. Her expression shifted when she saw Julia, not hostile, just cautious. "Mrs. Crowley," Sarah said. Neutral. "Waiting." "Miss Morrison." Julia approached the counter. "I need thread. And fabric for mending, if you have it." Sarah nodded, moved to the shelves, pulled down spools of thread in various colors. "What kind of fabric?" "Sturdy cotton, for work shirts." Sarah brought several bolts, spread them on the counter. Julia ran her fingers over them, chose the strongest weave. "How much do you need?" 3 yards should do it. Sarah began measuring. The silence stretched between them, not quite comfortable, not quite hostile. Finally, Sarah spoke. I heard you're working for Thomas Becket. I am. How's that going? Julia met her eyes. I work hard. He pays me fair. That's all there is to it. Sarah nodded slowly. Cut the fabric with sharp, precise movements. People talk, you know, about a woman your age living out there. People always talk, Julia said quietly, especially about women, especially when we don't do what they expect. Sarah paused, looked at Julia more carefully. You're right about that. She wrapped the fabric, added it to the thread, tallied the cost. Julia paid from the wages Thomas had given her. As Julia gathered her purchases, Sarah spoke again. I was interested in Thomas Becket once, about 3 years after his wife died. Thought maybe he'd notice me. Julia stopped, turned. He never did, Sarah continued. Her voice was matter of fact. No bitterness, just truth. Looked right through me like I was glass, but you he sees? Julia didn't know what to say. I wanted to hate you when you first arrived, Sarah said. The woman Pike rejected, living with the man who never looked at me twice. But I heard what happened, how Pike treated you, how you walked away. She came around the counter, stood close enough that Julia could see the fine lines around her eyes, the gray in her dark hair. I'm 46 years old, Sarah said. My husband left me 15 years ago. Said I couldn't give him children, so what good was I? Left me with this store and a reputation. For a long time I thought he was right, that I was useless. Julia's throat tightened. You're not. I know that now. Took me years to learn it, but I did. Sarah paused. What I'm saying is, I understand what it's like to be judged worthless because of things you can't control, your age, your ability to bear children, things that don't actually measure your worth. Julia felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back. If Thomas Becket sees you, Sarah said quietly, it's because you're worth seeing. Don't let Pike or anyone else tell you different. Julia nodded, unable to speak. Sarah squeezed her arm, brief and firm, then stepped back. You need anything else, you come see me. And if anyone in this town gives you trouble, you tell me. Women like us, we have to stand together. Thank you, Julia managed. She left the store with her packages and something else, something that felt almost like friendship. The stranger was waiting outside. He leaned against the hitching post, tall, weathered, maybe 45. He had the look of a man who spent his life on the road, dusty coat, sharp eyes, a careful way of watching everything. When Julia emerged, he straightened. Mrs. Crowley? Julia stopped. Her heart kicked. Who's asking? The man tipped his hat. Name's Calvin Dorset. Most folks call me Cal. I wonder if I might have a word with you. Julia's grip tightened on her packages. About what? Cal glanced around. The street was quiet, but not empty. Maybe somewhere more private? Every instinct Julia had screamed danger. Strange men, private conversations. She'd learned that lesson in Philadelphia. Anything you have to say, you can say here, she said firmly. Cal studied her face. Seemed to make a decision. All right, fair enough. I'm a detective, Mrs. Crowley, hired out of Denver. And I've been asked to look into your background. Julia's blood went cold. Who hired you? Client confidentiality, ma'am, but I think you can guess. Harland, of course. What do you want? Julia asked. Cal shifted his weight, looked uncomfortable. I've been investigating your history. Philadelphia, your marriages, your reasons for leaving. Julia felt her world tilt. You have no right. I have every right, Cal interrupted, gentle but firm. When someone hires me, I do the job. That's how I earn my living. He pulled a folded paper from his coat. I found records of your first marriage, your son's death certificate, your first husband's death certificate. Julia couldn't breathe. I also found records of your second marriage, Cal continued, to a man named Richard Crowley, married 1878, separated 1881. But here's the interesting part, ma'am. He unfolded the paper, showed it to her. I can't find a death certificate for Richard Crowley. Can't find a divorce decree either, just separation papers. which means, legally speaking, you might still be married. Julia stared at the paper, at the words that swam before her eyes. "That's not possible," she whispered. "He's dead. I was told he died 2 years ago." "Told by who?" "A neighbor. A woman who wrote me. She said Richard died of pneumonia." Cal nodded. "That may be true. But without a death certificate, there's no proof. And without proof, any relationship you enter into could be considered—" He trailed off. Let Julia finish the thought herself. "Adultery." "Why are you telling me this?" Julia asked. Her voice shook now. "Why not just give your report to whoever hired you?" Cal looked at her for a long moment. "Because my wife was your age when I met her, 48 years old, a widow. Everyone told me to find someone younger, someone who could give me children." He smiled, small and sad. "I married her anyway. Best decision I ever made. She died 3 years ago, cancer, and I'd trade every day since for one more hour with her." Julia's eyes burned. "What I found in your past, Mrs. Crowley, is a woman who survived things that would have broken most people, a woman who lost a child and kept going, who married a man who beat her and found the courage to leave, who came west looking for a second chance and got humiliated for trying." He refolded the paper, put it back in his coat. "I'm going to tell my client I couldn't find anything useful, just birth records and marriage certificates. Nothing scandalous, nothing that would help him." Julia stared at him. "Why would you lie?" "I'm not lying. I'm just choosing what to report." Cal tipped his hat. "But I'm also warning you, the man who hired me is desperate, and desperate men do desperate things. He wants you gone, Mrs. Crowley, wants you discredited, and he's got more money than sense. What should I do?" "Find proof that Richard Crowley is dead. Get a death certificate. Make sure your legal standing is clear, because if my client figures out what I found, he'll use it against you." Cal turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. The man who hired me, he tried to buy Thomas Beckett's land 3 times in the last 5 years. Always got refused. There's a creek on that property. Only year-round water source in 50 miles. Julia's mind raced. He needs the water. His ranch is dying without it. And he's desperate enough to do just about anything to get it. Cal met her eyes, including destroying you to hurt Beckett. Then he was gone, walking down the street, leaving Julia standing with her packages and a terror that made her hands shake. She told Thomas everything that night. Cookie sat at the table. Thomas stood by the fire. Both men listened without interrupting as Julia spoke. She told them about Richard, about the marriage that had seemed like safety after her first husband's death, about the wedding night when Richard had shown his true nature, about 3 years of walking on eggshells, of bruises hidden under long sleeves, of learning to be quiet, to disappear. She told them about the night she'd fought back, when Richard had come home drunk and angry, and when his fist had split her lip and something inside her had snapped. She'd grabbed the fireplace poker and swung, had run while he was still stunned and bleeding. She told them about the letter she'd received 2 years ago, about the neighbor who'd written to say Richard had died, about how Julia had felt guilty for the relief that flooded her. "I thought I was free," Julia said. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook. "I thought I was finally free to start over." Thomas's jaw was tight. "This Cal, you believe him?" "I do. He didn't have to warn me, didn't have to tell me about Harland hiring him." Cookie leaned forward. "He said you need proof Richard is dead." "Yes, a death certificate. But I don't know how to get one. I don't even know if he's actually dead or if that neighbor was wrong." Thomas moved to the table, sat down across from Julia. His eyes were fierce, but his voice was gentle. "We'll figure it out. Cookie's got a friend in Denver, works in records. We can wire him, ask him to search for a death certificate in Philadelphia." "That could take weeks," Julia said. "Then we take weeks, but we get the proof." Thomas reached across the table, stopped just short of touching her hand. "You're not alone in this, Julia. You understand that?" Julia looked at his hand, so close, so careful not to push. She placed her hand over his, just for a moment, just to say, "Thank you." Thomas's breath caught. His fingers closed over hers, warm and calloused and steady. "We'll fix this," he said. Julia nodded, believed him. The next day, Cookie took Julia into town to send the telegram. While they waited for a reply, Julia threw herself into work, cooked, cleaned, mended, tried not to think about Richard, about Harland, about everything that could go wrong, but she also started teaching. It began small. The children of one of the ranch hands came by the cabin, a boy of 8 and a girl of 6. Their mother had died the year before. Their father worked long hours. They were wild and half feral. Julia found them trying to catch chickens in the yard. "You looking for eggs?" she asked. The boy nodded, suspicious. "I'll show you where they are, but then you have to help me with something." "What?" Julia smiled. "I need someone to practice teaching on. I used to teach reading back east, but I'm rusty. Think you could help?" The children exchanged glances. Agreed. That afternoon, Julia taught them their letters, used a stick to draw in the dirt outside the cabin, let them trace the shapes, told them stories about each letter. The boy was sharp, caught on quick. The girl was slower, but determined. When their father came to collect them, they were arguing about whether C looked more like a moon or a snake. "They giving you trouble, ma'am?" the father asked. "No trouble at all. They're smart children. Would you mind if I taught them a few days a week while you're working?" The man's face softened. "You'd do that?" "I'd like to, if it's all right with you." Word spread. Within a week, Julia had 5 children coming to the cabin 3 afternoons a week. Within 2 weeks, she had 8. She taught on the porch when weather allowed, inside by the fire when it didn't, used whatever materials she could find, chalk on slate, charcoal on wood, anything that would make letters. The children learned, and Julia found something she'd lost: purpose. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was building something, contributing, mattering. One afternoon, Dr. Elizabeth Carter rode out to the ranch. She was the town's only physician, a woman of 38 who'd fought tooth and nail to practice medicine in a place that barely trusted female doctors. She found Julia teaching on the porch. "Mrs. Crowley?" Julia looked up. "Dr. Carter, is someone hurt?" "No. I heard you were teaching children. Wanted to see for myself." Julia gestured to the children bent over their slates. "Just basic reading, letters and simple words." Dr. Carter watched for a moment, then smiled. "The Miller children couldn't even write their names a month ago. Now they're reading 3-letter words." Julia felt pride warm her chest. "They're good students." "You're a good teacher." Dr. Carter paused. "I also heard about your trouble with Harland Pike." Julia's guard went up. "News travels fast. In a town this small, always." Dr. Carter lowered her voice. "I wanted to tell you something about Pike's first wife." Julia's attention sharpened. "She died in childbirth," Dr. Carter said quietly. 10 years ago. The baby died too, boy. Pike wanted a son so badly he pushed her to try again, even though I warned him she was too weak, too sick." Julia's stomach turned. "He killed her. The birth killed her." But Pike's desperation for an heir didn't help. Dr. Carter met Julia's eyes. "I'm telling you this because I want you to understand what kind of man you're dealing with. He sees women as vessels, tools for producing children, not as people." "I know what kind of man he is," Julia said softly. "I figured you did. But I also wanted you to know that you're not the first woman he's treated this way. And people remember. They remember how he drove his wife into the grave with his demands. They remember how he turned you away." Dr. Carter straightened. "Not everyone in this town is on his side, Mrs. Crowley. Some of us see what he is, and some of us are glad you're here." She tipped her hat and rode away. Julia stood on the porch long after the doctor left, processing, understanding. Harland wasn't just cruel, he was damaged, broken by loss and twisted by desperation. That didn't excuse him, but it explained him. That night, Cookie told Julia about Hannah. Thomas had gone to check the cattle. They sat by the fire, Cookie mending harness, Julia sewing. "You want to know about Hannah?" Cookie asked. Julia's hands stilled. "Only if you want to tell me." Cookie was quiet for a moment, then began. Hannah was beautiful. That's the first thing everyone noticed. Blonde hair, blue eyes, smile that could light up a room, but that wasn't what made her special. He set down his work, stared into the fire. She was kind, smart, ran this ranch as well as any man, could ride, rope, brand cattle, shoot straight. But she was also gentle, took care of people, made them feel seen. Julia listened, aching. Thomas met her at a dance in town. She was 22, he was 28. He wasn't the only man who wanted her. Cookie glanced at Julia. Harland Pike wanted her too, courted her hard, brought her flowers, presents, promised her the world. Julia's breath caught. Harland knew Hannah? Knew her? He was determined to marry her, thought he had a chance. Hannah was polite to him, kind, but she never encouraged him. Her heart was already set on Thomas. Cookie smiled at the memory. Thomas was nothing special to look at. Quiet, serious, worked too hard. But Hannah saw something in him, something solid and true. What happened? She chose Thomas, told Pike as gently as she could. But Pike didn't take it well, told everyone Thomas had stolen her, manipulated her, turned her against him. That's why he hates Thomas, Julia whispered. That's part of it. The other part is that Thomas got everything Pike wanted. The woman, the land, the water rights that came with Hannah's family property. Cookie looked at Julia. When you showed up, when Thomas took you in, Pike saw it as Thomas winning again. Taking another woman Pike thought he deserved. Julia shook her head. He didn't want me. He rejected me. He wanted to reject you on his terms, control the situation, but you survived without him, found a place with the man who beat him 15 years ago. That's more than Pike can stand. Julia sat back, mind reeling. Thomas doesn't know I know this, does he? No. And I'm only telling you because you need to understand what you're up against. This isn't just about you. It's about a 15-year-old grudge, about water rights and land and a dead woman Pike still thinks should have been his. What should I do? Cookie met her eyes. Be careful, be smart, and don't underestimate what Pike will do when he's desperate. The telegram came a week later. Thomas brought it back from town, handed it to Julia with careful hope in his eyes. She unfolded it, read. Death certificate found stop. Richard Crowley died September 1883. Pneumonia stop. Certified copy being sent. Stop. Julia's knees went weak. Thomas caught her, held her steady. He's dead, she whispered. He's really dead. You're free, Thomas said. Legally. Completely. Free. Julia laughed, a sound caught between relief and hysteria. Free. Cookie whooped. I'll make something special for dinner. We're celebrating. But Julia couldn't celebrate yet, couldn't relax, because Cal had warned her. And now that she had proof, she needed to make sure Harland couldn't use anything else against her. We should tell the Reverend, Julia said. Make it official. Make sure everyone knows my legal status is clear. Thomas nodded. Good thinking. We'll go Sunday. Sunday came. They rode to church together. Thomas, Cookie, and Julia. The church was small, simple. Wooden pews and a pulpit. A cross on the wall. Reverend Samuel Hayes stood at the door greeting parishioners. He was a man of 60 with kind eyes and gray hair. When he saw Julia, he smiled. Mrs. Crowley, good to see you. Reverend? Julia nodded. They took seats near the back. Julia felt eyes on her, whispers. But she kept her head high. After the service, Reverend Hayes asked to speak with them. In his small office, Julia explained the situation, showed him the telegram, explained about the death certificate coming. Reverend Hayes listened carefully. You want this documented, made public. I want there to be no question about my legal status, Julia said firmly. The Reverend nodded. I'll announce it next Sunday. Make sure the whole congregation knows. And I'll keep the certified copy on file here at the church. He paused. I also want you to know, Mrs. Crowley, that I support what you're doing, teaching the children, working honestly. You've conducted yourself with dignity despite how you were treated. Julia felt tears threaten. Thank you, Reverend. As they left the church, Julia saw Harland Pike across the street. He stood by his horse, watching. His face was hard, angry. Their eyes met. Harland mounted up, rode toward them, stopped a few feet away. "I hear you got good news, Mrs. Crowley," he said. His voice was cold. "Found proof your husband is dead." "I did." "Convenient." Thomas stepped forward. "Watch yourself, Pike." "Or what, Beckett? You'll defend her honor?" Harland laughed, bitter. "You've been defending women who don't belong to you for years. Took Hannah from me. Now this one." "Hannah never belonged to you," Thomas said quietly. "She chose me. That ate at you then, and it eats at you now." Harland's face went dark. "You stole her." "I loved her. There's a difference." "And now you love this one?" Harland gestured at Julia. "This old woman who lied her way west?" Julia spoke before Thomas could. "I didn't lie. And even if I had, it's none of your concern anymore. You rejected me. You have no claim, no say, no right. I have every right to protect this town from women of questionable character." "The only person of questionable character here is you," Julia said. Her voice was steel. "You judge women by their ability to breed. You drove your first wife into the grave with your demands, and now you're so desperate for water that you'll destroy anyone who stands in your way." Harland went still. "What did you say?" "I know about the water rights. I know your ranch is dying. I know you've tried to buy Thomas's land 3 times, and I know that's why you want me gone. Because as long as I'm here, Thomas won't leave, won't sell, won't give you what you want." Harland's hand moved toward his gun. Thomas was faster, had his own gun out, and aimed before Harland could draw. "Don't," Thomas said. Very quiet, very dangerous. Harland froze, looked around, realized a dozen townspeople were watching. Reverend Hayes stood on the church steps. Dr. Carter stood by her wagon. Sarah Morrison watched from her store. Harland slowly raised his hands. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Julia said. "You lost, Harland. 15 years ago when Hannah chose Thomas. Last month when I walked away from you. Today when the truth came out. You lost." Harland stared at her. Something broke in his face, not shame, rage. "There's a dance next Saturday," he said. "Community gathering. Everyone in town will be there. I'll see you then, Mrs. Crowley. We can settle this properly, in front of everyone." He wheeled his horse and rode off. Julia stood shaking. Thomas holstered his gun, put his hand on her shoulder. "You all right?" Julia nodded. But she wasn't, because she knew what was coming, a confrontation, public, final, and she had 1 week to prepare. Thomas found Julia at Hannah's grave that evening. She'd walked up the hill behind the barn without telling anyone, needed to think, to process. The grave was simple, a wooden cross. Hannah's name and dates carved careful and deep. Julia stood looking at it. This woman she'd never met, this ghost who still shaped everything. She heard Thomas approach, didn't turn. "I should have told you," he said. "About Harland and Hannah?" "Cookie told me." Thomas stood beside her, close but not touching. "Hannah would have liked you." Julia's throat tightened. "How do you know?" "Because she liked people who were strong, who didn't give up, who fought for what they believed in." He paused. "That was you. Is you." Julia finally looked at him. "I don't want to replace her. I know. And I don't want you to." Thomas stared at the grave. "But I need to tell you something about the promise I made her." Julia waited. The night she died, she was struggling to breathe, could barely talk. She said, "Promise me you won't be alone forever." And I heard it wrong. Or maybe I wanted to hear it wrong. I said, "I promise I'll never love anyone else." He closed his eyes. She tried to correct me, tried to say that wasn't what she meant, but she was too weak. She died that night. And I've spent 5 years believing I promised not to love again. Julia's heart ached. But that's not what she asked. No, she asked me not to be alone, not to waste my life in grief, but I twisted it, made it about loyalty to her instead of about living for myself. Thomas turned to Julia. "I've been dead for 5 years, going through the motions, working, eating, sleeping, but not living, Not really. He reached out, touched her face, gentle, careful. You brought me back, he said. Didn't mean to, didn't try to, just by being yourself, by being strong and kind and refusing to disappear. You made me want to live again. Julia's breath caught. I don't know what happens next, Thomas said. I don't know if this is right or wrong, if Hannah would approve or if I'm betraying her memory. But I know I care about you, more than I've cared about anyone since she died. Julia placed her hand over his. I care about you too. Even knowing I'm still figuring out how to let her go? Even knowing that. Because grief isn't something you let go, it's something you learn to carry, and I'd rather carry it with you than be alone. Thomas pulled her close, wrapped his arms around her. Julia leaned into him, let herself be held. They stood there as the sun set, two broken people learning how to be whole together. Below them, the ranch spread out, peaceful, home. Above them, the sky deepened to purple and gold. And on the hill, by Hannah's grave, Thomas Becket made a different promise. I loved you, he whispered to the woman beneath the earth. I still do, but loving her doesn't erase you. It just means my heart got bigger, big enough to hold both of you. He looked down at Julia, and that's what you wanted, wasn't it? For me to keep living, keep loving, keep going. Julia felt tears on her cheeks. Didn't know if they were hers or Thomas's. It didn't matter. They were together. And for the first time in 5 years, Thomas felt Hannah's presence not as a weight, but as a blessing. She was letting him go, and he was finally ready to be let go. The week before the dance passed in a blur. Julia taught her students, cooked for the ranch hands, prepared for what was coming. Cal returned one more time, found Julia in town. I told Pike I couldn't find anything useful, he said. He didn't believe me, paid me anyway, but I think he's got another plan. What kind of plan? Cal looked uncomfortable. I don't know, but he's desperate, and he's not the kind of man who gives up easy. Watch yourself at that dance. Then he tipped his hat. I'm heading to Denver. Got other work. But I wanted to warn you one last time. Men like Pike, when they're backed into a corner, they strike out, and they don't care who gets hurt. He paused. For what it's worth, Mrs. Crowley, I hope you and Becket work out. You deserve happiness, both of you. Then he was gone. Julia stood in the street watching him ride away. 1 week until the dance, 1 week until the confrontation. She went back to the ranch, found Thomas in the barn. Cal came to warn me, she said. Said Harlan's planning something. Thomas nodded. Figured he would. Man like that doesn't make threats and then do nothing. What do we do? Thomas looked at her. His eyes were steady. Sure. We go to the dance. We show the town we're not afraid. We let Harlan make his move. And then we end this, once and for all. Julia nodded. Together. Together, Thomas agreed. He held out his hand. Julia took it. And in the quiet of the barn, with the horses shifting in their stalls and the afternoon light slanting through the gaps in the walls, they made a plan. Whatever Harlan brought to that dance, they would face it, together. Cookie finished this part of the story and looked at Jack. The young cowboy sat forward in his chair, completely absorbed. So they went to the dance knowing Pike would cause trouble? They did, Cookie said. Because sometimes you have to face your demons head on, can't run forever, can't hide. Eventually, you have to stand your ground and say, enough. He stood, stretched. And that's what they did. But what happened at that dance, Cookie smiled, that's where this story really becomes a legend. Jack opened his mouth to ask for more. Cookie shook his head. I got biscuits to make. And you got work to do. Come back tonight. I'll tell you the rest then. Jack wanted to protest, but Cookie's face said the matter was settled. As Jack headed out to his chores, he looked toward the schoolhouse, saw Julia teaching children, saw the way she held herself, proud, strong, unbreakable. And he finally understood what Cookie had been trying to tell him all along. That woman wasn't old. She was ageless, timeless, a force of nature wrapped in faded calico. And Harlan Pike had been a fool to let her go. Saturday came cold and clear. Julia stood in her small room, looking at the dress Cookie had helped her buy in town. Deep green wool, simple but well made, the first new dress she'd owned in 5 years. She pinned her hair careful and neat, not trying to hide the gray, not trying to look younger, just trying to look like herself. Through the door, she heard Thomas and Cookie talking. "You ready for this?" Cookie asked. "No," Thomas said. "But we're going anyway." Julia smiled, took a breath, opened the door. Both men turned to look at her. Thomas's face changed, softened. "You look beautiful." Julia felt heat in her cheeks. "I look presentable." "You look like a woman who knows her worth," Cookie said firmly, "which is exactly what you are." They rode to town in the wagon. Julia sat between the two men. The evening air was sharp with coming winter. Stars were beginning to appear. The community hall glowed with lamplight. Music spilled from the open doors, fiddle and banjo, the sound of voices and laughter. Julia's stomach tightened. Thomas seemed to sense it. He didn't say anything, just offered his arm as she climbed down from the wagon. She took it. They walked in together. The hall fell quiet when they entered. Not completely. The music kept playing, but conversations paused. Heads turned. Eyes followed them as Thomas led Julia to the edge of the dance floor. Sarah Morrison stood near the punch table. She caught Julia's eye and smiled, nodded. Dr. Carter was there too. She raised her cup in a small salute. Reverend Hayes approached. "Mrs. Crowley, Thomas, glad you came." "Wouldn't miss it," Thomas said. The Reverend glanced around the room. "Pike's here. Came in an hour ago with some of his men. He's been holding court, telling stories." "What kind of stories?" Julia asked. "The kind that paint you in a bad light. But nobody's believing him." "Not after last Sunday." Julia nodded. "Thank you for warning us." The music shifted. A waltz began. Thomas turned to Julia. "Would you dance with me?" Julia's heart hammered. "I haven't danced in 20 years. "Neither have I. We'll be terrible together." Despite her fear, Julia smiled. "All right." Thomas led her onto the floor, placed his hand on her waist, took her hand in his. They began to move. They were terrible. Stepped on each other's feet. Lost the rhythm. Had to start over twice. But Julia was laughing. And Thomas was smiling. And around them, the town watched. Watched a widower dance for the first time in 5 years. Watched a woman who'd been rejected hold her head high. Watched something simple and beautiful and true. When the song ended, a few people applauded. Sarah Morrison loudest among them. Julia and Thomas stepped apart. Both breathing hard, both grinning like fools. Then Harland Pike stepped forward. He wasn't drunk, wasn't disheveled. He wore a clean suit. His hair was combed. He looked respectable, controlled, which made him more dangerous. "Beckett, Mrs. Crowley." He nodded to them both, polite, cold. "Pike," Thomas said. Harland glanced around, made sure people were watching. "I wonder if I might have a word, publicly, since this concerns the whole community." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Say what you came to say." Harland pulled a paper from his coat. "I've been doing some investigating into Mrs. Crowley's background, her legal status." Julia felt ice in her veins. "I have here," Harland continued, "evidence that raises questions about her marriage, her residency, her character." "That's enough," Thomas said. "Is it?" Harland's voice rose, addressing the room now. "We have a woman who came here under false pretenses, who sent a photograph 10 years old, who's been living with a man she's not married to, a woman whose own husband might still be alive for all we know." Reverend Hayes stepped forward. "Pike, we discussed this last Sunday. Mrs. Crowley has proof that arrived conveniently after she needed it," Harland interrupted. "A telegram, a piece of paper. How do we know it's real?" Julia felt the room shift, people murmuring, doubt creeping in. She looked at Thomas. He was ready to fight, ready to defend her. But this wasn't his fight. This was hers. Julia stepped forward, away from Thomas, standing alone in the center of the room. "You want to question my character, Mr. Pike?" Her voice was steady, clear. "Then let me tell you about my character. She turned slowly, addressed the whole room. I'm 52 years old. I've buried a husband and a child. I've worked as a nurse and a seamstress. I've survived poverty and grief and a second marriage to a man who beat me. Gasps around the room. Julia didn't stop. When I came west, I was looking for a second chance. Not to deceive anyone, just to start over, to find a place where I could be useful again. She looked at Harland. Mr. Pike rejected me because of my age. Said I was too old to give him children. Too old to be a wife. He offered me money to go away, quietly. To disappear. Julia's voice grew stronger. I didn't take his money. I walked. 10 miles in the dark, because I would rather freeze than accept charity from a man who saw me as livestock. She gestured to Thomas. Thomas Beckett found me on that road, offered me shelter, then offered me work. I've earned every dollar he's paid me. I've cooked for his men, taught children to read, contributed to this community. Julia turned back to Harland. You say I'm of questionable character? You drove your first wife into the grave with your demands for an heir. You've tried to buy Thomas's land 3 times because you need his water, and now you're trying to destroy me because I survived without you. The room was silent now, everyone watching. I have proof my husband is dead, Julia continued. The death certificate is on file with Reverend Hayes. Any of you can verify it. But even if I didn't have that proof, it wouldn't change who I am. She stood taller. I'm a woman who's made mistakes, who's survived things that would have broken others, who keeps going even when the world tells her she's worthless. That's my character, Mr. Pike, and I'm not ashamed of it. Harland's face was dark with rage. You think you can just— I think, Julia interrupted, that you came here tonight expecting to humiliate me, to drive me away, to hurt Thomas by taking away something he cares about. But you can't, because I'm not going anywhere. She stepped closer to Harland, close enough that only he could hear her next words. You lost Hannah 15 years ago. You're losing your ranch now, and you'll lose this too, because you never learned that you can't force people to need you. You have to earn it. Harland raised his hand. For a moment, Julia thought he might strike her. Then a voice rang out. Touch her and you'll answer to me. Jack Morrison stepped forward, the young cowboy who'd mocked Julia that first day. He stood beside her now, protective. And me, said Pete Garza. And me, said Dr. Carter. One by one, people stepped forward. Not everyone, but enough. Sarah Morrison, Reverend Hayes, Old Sam, Cookie, and Thomas standing closest of all. Harland looked around, saw himself surrounded, outnumbered. He lowered his hand. This town deserves better than liars and opportunists, he said, voice shaking now. You're right, Sarah Morrison said, which is why we're glad Julia Crowley is here, and why we're asking you to leave. Harland stared at her. What? You heard me? Leave? This is a community dance, for people who contribute to the community. You just tried to destroy a woman for the crime of surviving. We don't want you here. Harland looked at Reverend Hayes. You going to allow this? The Reverend's face was sad but firm. I think it's time you went home, Harland, before this gets worse. Harland's composure finally cracked. You'll all regret this when my ranch fails, when I can't pay my debts. This town needs me. No, Thomas said quietly, it doesn't. But I'll tell you what I'll do. That creek you want so badly, the one you tried to buy 3 times, I'm opening it to community use. Anyone who needs water can take it, including you. Harland stared. What? You heard me? Free water for everyone. You don't have to buy my land, don't have to destroy Julia. Just come get what you need like everyone else. Julia's breath caught. She looked at Thomas. He met her eyes, nodded. They'd discussed this, planned it. The way to beat Harland wasn't with cruelty, it was with generosity. Harland stood frozen, defeated not by force, but by kindness. I don't want your charity, he said finally. It's not charity, it's water. Take it or don't. Your choice. Harland looked around one more time, saw the faces watching him, judging him. Then he turned and walked out. The door closed behind him. For a moment, no one moved. Then the fiddle started playing again. The banjo joined in. Someone laughed. The dance continued. Julia stood in the center of the room, shaking. Thomas came to her side, took her arm. "You all right?" Julia nodded. Couldn't speak yet. Sarah Morrison approached. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen." "I was terrified," Julia admitted. "Being brave doesn't mean not being afraid. It means doing it anyway." Sarah smiled. "Welcome to Roland, Mrs. Crowley. For real this time." Later, after the dancing resumed and the tension eased, Thomas led Julia outside. The night air was cold and clear. Stars blazed overhead. The music drifted faint and sweet from the hall. "I need to show you something," Thomas said. He led her down the street, past the darkened stores, to the edge of town where the grassland began. There, in the starlight, he stopped. "I've been carrying this for 5 years," he said, reached into his coat, pulled out something small, a ribbon, velvet, faded rose color, worn soft with time. "This was Hannah's," Thomas said. "She wore it every day we were married, tied it around her wrist, said it reminded her of her mother." Julia's throat tightened. "When she died, I took it off her wrist and put it in my pocket. Couldn't bear to look at it. Couldn't bear to throw it away. Just carried it. Like a weight." He held it up in the starlight. "I went to her grave yesterday, told her about you, about what I feel, about how scared I am of loving again and losing again." "Thomas, let me finish." His voice was gentle. "I told her I was ready to let go, not of her memory, but of the promise I made, the one that's been keeping me half dead for 5 years. He took Julia's hand, turned it palm up. "I can't promise you forever, can't promise I won't be scared, can't promise I know how to do this right." He placed the ribbon in her palm. "But I can promise you today, and tomorrow, and every day after that I'm lucky enough to have." Julia looked down at the ribbon. This piece of Hannah, this symbol of Thomas's past. "I'm not asking you to replace her," Thomas said. "I'm asking you to stand beside her in my heart, because it's big enough for both of you now." Julia's eyes burned with tears. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." Julia closed her fingers around the ribbon. "Then yes. Today and tomorrow and every day after." Thomas pulled her close, kissed her, gentle and careful and full of promise. When they pulled apart, Julia looked at the ribbon in her hand. "Will you help me tie it?" she asked. Thomas took the ribbon, wrapped it around her wrist, tied it with careful fingers. It sat there, faded and soft and perfect, a bridge between past and future, between grief and hope, between what was lost and what was found. "There," Thomas said. "Now everyone will know." Julia smiled through tears. "Know what?" "That you're mine, and I'm yours, and that's all that matters." They stood together under the stars, two broken people who'd found a way to be whole, and in the distance the music played on. Cookie paused, refilled his coffee cup. The kitchen had grown dark while he talked. Jack sat motionless in the gathering dusk. "That was the night," Cookie said. "November 1885, the night Julia Crowley became Julia Beckett in every way that mattered." "Did they marry?" Jack asked. "The following spring, small ceremony, just family and close friends. Reverend Hayes officiated. Julia wore that ribbon on her wrist." Cookie gestured toward the window. 5 years later, she still wears it. Every day. And Thomas still looks at her like she hung the moon." Jack was quiet for a long moment. "What happened to Pike?" "He used the creek water, saved his ranch. Never apologized, never thanked Thomas. But he stopped causing trouble. Realized he couldn't win against kindness." Cookie stood, stretched his old bones. "He sold the ranch 2 years ago, moved to Denver. Last I heard, he was managing a hotel, still alone, still bitter." "And Cal, the detective, sent Julia a letter a year later, said his wife would have liked her, asked if she was happy. Julia wrote back, said she was. They still correspond, Christmas cards mostly." Jack shook his head, amazed. "And the whole time folks thought she was just an old woman teaching school." "That's the thing about people," Cookie said. "We're all carrying stories nobody knows. Julia's just braver than most about living hers out loud." He moved to the window, looked out at the darkening yard. "There," he said, "look!" Jack joined him. In the fading light, Julia and Thomas walked together toward the house, her hand in his, the ribbon visible on her wrist even at this distance. They moved slow, easy, like people who had all the time in the world. 5 years, Cookie said softly, and they still walk like that every evening, rain or shine, winter or summer, just being together. Jack watched them, saw the way Thomas opened the gate for Julia, the way she smiled up at him, the way they moved like two parts of one whole. "I was wrong," Jack said. "That first day, calling her old. Yes, you were, but you learned. That's what matters." The door opened. Julia and Thomas came in with the cold. Julia saw Jack and smiled. "Mr. Morrison, staying for dinner?" Jack stood quickly. "Only if it's not too much trouble, ma'am." "No trouble at all. Cookie made enough for an army." She removed her coat, hung it carefully. The ribbon caught the lamplight as she moved. Thomas hung his own coat, nodded to Jack, then to Cookie. "Telling stories again?" The boy asked. Cookie said, I obliged." Thomas looked at Julia. Something passed between them, a smile, shared and private. "Well," Thomas said, "long as he got the facts right." "Did he?" Jack asked Julia. Julia moved to the stove, began helping Cookie with dinner. "Cookie always gets the facts right. It's why I trust him with our story." She paused, looked at Jack. "Did you learn anything?" Jack thought about it. About the woman who'd walked through fire, who'd faced humiliation and kept going, who'd stood up in front of a whole town and claimed her worth. "I learned that brave doesn't look like I thought it did," he said. Julia smiled. "Good. That's a start." They ate dinner together, the four of them, simple food, good conversation, easy laughter. After, while Thomas and Julia did dishes, Cookie poured Jack one more cup of coffee. "You asked me this morning who that old lady was," Cookie said. "You got your answer?" Jack nodded. "Yes, sir. That's Mrs. Julia Beckett, teacher, survivor, one of the bravest women in 3 counties. Cookie grinned. "Now you're learning." Jack glanced at Julia. "Can I ask her something?" "Go ahead." Jack approached the sink. "Mrs. Beckett, can I ask you something personal?" Julia turned, drying her hands. "Of course." "Do you ever regret it? Coming west? All the pain it caused?" Julia looked at Thomas, at the ribbon on her wrist, at the home she'd built from nothing. "Not for a second," she said. "The pain made me stronger. The journey brought me here, and here is exactly where I belong." She touched the ribbon. "Some stories don't bloom until late spring, but they bloom brighter for the wait." Jack nodded, understanding finally settling deep. Later, as he prepared to leave, Julia stopped him at the door. "Mr. Morrison, thank you for defending me that night. At the dance. It meant more than you know." Jack ducked his head, embarrassed. "I was just doing what was right. That's all any of us can do, remember that." She pressed something into his hand, a small package wrapped in cloth. "What's this?" "Biscuits for tomorrow, and a book. I noticed you watching the children during lessons. Thought you might want to learn too." Jack's face burned. "I can't read much, ma'am." "Then you'll learn. Come by on Sundays. I'll teach you." Jack looked at the package, at this woman who saw him, who offered help without judgment. "Thank you, Mrs. Beckett." "You're welcome, Jack." He left into the cold night, walking toward the bunkhouse with his package and his new understanding. Inside the warm kitchen, Julia returned to Thomas's hut. He put his arm around her, pulled her close. "Another one saved," he said. "Another one learning," Julia corrected. "That boy has potential." Cookie banked the fire, prepared for bed, left them standing together. Julia leaned against Thomas, felt his heartbeat steady and sure. "Do you ever miss her?" she asked quietly. "Hannah?" "Every day," Thomas said honestly, "but not the way I used to. Now it's gentle, like remembering summer in the middle of winter. Good memories, not painful ones. Because of the ribbon, because of you. Because you taught me that love doesn't run out. It just grows to hold more people." Julia closed her eyes, let herself be held. Outside, the Wyoming night deepened. Stars wheeled overhead, wind whispered through the grass. And in the small cabin on the edge of the territory, Two people who'd thought their lives were over held each other close. Not perfect, not young, not what the world expected, but whole and happy and exactly where they belonged. The ribbon on Julia's wrist caught the firelight, faded rose, soft velvet, a bridge between past and present, between the woman who was gone and the woman who remained, between promises kept and promises made new. Julia May Crowley had come west looking for a second chance. She'd found something better. She'd found herself. And in finding herself, she'd found a love that saw her not in spite of her years, but because of them. Not despite her scars, but because she'd survived them. Not looking past her age, but looking directly at her soul. The train had brought her here. The rejection had broken her open. The walk through darkness had tested her. But the ribbon had sealed her fate. And 5 years later, she was still here, still teaching, still loving, still proving every single day that there was no expiration date on worth, on dignity, on love. The fire crackled. The wind blew. The stars turned overhead, and Julia Beckett smiled. Because some stories don't bloom until late spring, but they bloom brighter for the wait.